So started the recording also. Okay. Hello, you hear me, no?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So my name is Rajib Nandi. I am a member of the core group of evaluation community of India, and very happy to declare that this is the first webinar that EQI is organizing in association with Sri Lanka Evaluation Association and Indonesian Development Evaluation Community Index, since we have signed the MOU with both these bodies during the EvalFest 2020 in February, New Delhi. So, on behalf of the organizers, EQI, SLEVA, and Index, let me welcome you all to this very important and interesting webinar today on empowerment evaluation. I would like to convey my special thanks to Dr. David, Aniruddha, and Damairia for agreeing to speak, moderate, and deliver the closing remarks respectively for this webinar. Let me also update you that this webinar is part of the Eval for Action Decade campaign. Let me tell you about the campaign very briefly. The Eval for Action campaign seeks to promote widespread recognition on evaluation being critical to and a key accelerator for achieving the global goals. It will mobilize commitments by different stakeholders, parliaments, governments, evaluation associations to invest in stronger evaluation systems to inform public policies, ensuring no one is left behind. United Nations Population Fund and Eval Youth are co-leaders of this campaign. Now, without wasting much time, let me introduce Aniruddha Brahmachari, the moderator of today's session. Aniruddha is a social sector professional with more than 20 years of experience in program management and monitoring and evaluation. Mr. Brahmachari presently works as a Global Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Officer with the Oxfam International Secretariat. He has authored many papers and edited 3 books on evaluations: Evaluations for Sustainable Development Experiences and Learning in 2015, New Directions for Evaluations, Visibility, Voice and Value in 2018, and very recently, Emerging Evaluation Experiences, Way Forward for Achieving Sustainable Development Goals. This was published very recently in February, New Delhi, during the EvalFest 2020. So let me welcome you, Anirudh, as the moderator of this session. So what do you?
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you, David, and welcome to all of you. And it's really heartening that as ECOI or Evaluation Community of India, we have been able to get this going. And in these times, these learning sessions are really a treat and keeps us motivated and to learn and hear from experts from different parts of the evaluation world. And David is one of the experts in this evaluation world. And for the last 25 years, David, who is our speaker today, has been associated with Stanford University as a faculty. He has been also associated with a number of foundations and organizations like the Hewlett-Packard Foundations, the Packard Philanthropy, and he has been also the past president of American Anthropological Association. Today, we are here to discuss with David the path-breaking work or his work on empowered evaluation. Because as evaluators, we always are trying to understand how do we empower people and the communities and bring them in the center of evaluation process, both as a contributor and a stakeholder. And this sort of problem or a issue has been faced by each evaluator who has gone to the field and done work with the community. And David today is going to sort of answer a few questions around that from his experience, from his work around empowerment evaluations, and help us learn how we can both improve our craft and learn to do better evaluations. David, I welcome you to this session, and over to you now.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you inviting me, and I'm happy to be here today. I'll try to leave as much time as I can for questions and answers as well, but to make sure everyone's on the same playing field, I'll give an overview of what empowerment evaluation is about. So let me start over here, and like so. And I'll start like this. My feeling is that evaluation can be like a bridge over troubled water. This is me. I took my family and we actually hiked to Mount Everest Base Camp last September. This is going over one of the bridges. And I feel that all the different troubles that we face in our world, our society, our communities, evaluation can be a bridge to help people get over those problems and reach goals that are related to social justice, as well as just basic program improvement. To me, they're very similar to some of the sturdy bridges that we trekked over while we were there. But before we do that, just like trekking, I thought we'd look at the landscape of stakeholder involvement approaches in evaluation before launching into a focus on empowerment evaluation. In one of our latest books, Collaborative, Participatory, and Empowerment Evaluation, Stakeholder Involvement Approaches, we have the major proponents and founders of these different approaches highlight their work in a essentials chapter and then 2 chapters of examples so people can see it. Chris is an artist. He does beautiful cartoon work you're probably familiar with already on evaluation, and he helped picture this from the evaluation or evaluator perspective. He drew this, and we put this in the book as well. And it's a nice way of capturing the differences before we launch into empowerment evaluation. When you're a collaborative evaluator, you're in charge as the evaluator, but you're really looking for as much input to make that possible with the folks you're working with in the community. In participatory evaluation, you are sharing control of the evaluation to make it successful. With empowerment, this is a major difference. You are getting to where participatory likes to get from the get-go, from the beginning, where the community is in charge of the goals, strategies of what they want to accomplish, and you are the coach and critical friend. Shocking for a lot of evaluators, but it's become probably over 1/4 of the membership at the American Evaluation Association, as well as this operating in 16 different countries, become a very powerful normative kind of approach at this point. And it's recognized in other fields as well. For example, in anthropology, you have different kinds of anthropology, like action anthropology and things of that nature, where you're acting as the coach and helping the group that you're working with get to where they're going by making the work rigorous and fair and honest, but still their goals, their strategies, rather than ours. And we'll go into why that's really important in a minute. Empowerment evaluation is operating in, as I said, in about 16 or more countries right now, ranging from Australia, Canada, also Ethiopia, Finland, Mexico, Nepal, New Zealand, South Africa, all around the world, often working with UNICEF and other folks. And we're learning as much as we're hopefully teaching and helping others use this approach to get stakeholder involvement at a high degree and one that's sustainable. I work also in squatter settlements and townships in South Africa. And here's one on the left where this woman ended up in this situation. These are squatter settlements. And if you're not familiar with them, this is in South Africa with this very little electricity, almost no water, kind of desperate conditions. And there are sometimes communities of over 20,000 at a shot, and no one knows how many there are. But in these tough, difficult situations, you look on the right, on the top corner, they have a daycare center. My point in this slide is simply to highlight the only thing you need to do an empowerment evaluation is for folks in the community to have a desire for a better life. That's all. And you'll see the steps and the approach to concept are relatively simple, and maybe that's why they've been pretty successful, used around the world. I think it begins with our children, basically. You want to think about what your desire is for that next generation. And we all, I think, want to do the best we can. That's my son, by the way. He's trekking with me when he was only 12 up to Mount Everest Base Camp, which also shows the potential of our children. We don't want to underestimate what they can do, but we want to do it safely and with a safety net, which is what we want to do in evaluation as well. Today, I just want to highlight a few examples when I go through this of empowerment evaluation. And you can look at some of the books and references later for more detail. But in the right-hand corner, you'll see that's me in my class at Stanford, and it's a we're basically focusing on a $15 million digital village project, where basically you're trying to bridge the digital divide in communities of color. In that case, I'm highlighting or interacting with Native Americans on the screen, which I'll mention a little bit later. The picture on the left-hand corner on top, that's a school in Arkansas, that's a community in Arkansas, where we work with schools in academic distress. The bottom picture on the left-hand corner, that's where I used to be the director of evaluation in the School of Medicine at Stanford as well, and we used it to get through accreditation. On the bottom right-hand corner is just a picture of our work in Arkansas, where we do tobacco prevention, keeping minority kids away from tobacco. And once again, I can highlight what you might want to read about for understanding these in more detail, but I'll be mentioning these as a way of highlighting aspects of empowerment evaluation today. So what is empowerment evaluation? I'm going to go briefly over the definition, some of the theory, concepts, and steps. When you have this, most of you will be able to do a lot of empowerment evaluation. Plus, of course, getting assistance from someone who has done some work of this nature in the past. But you'll see the steps are very straightforward that you can adapt and put in your tool kit as you do evaluation. So let's start with the definition. And I came up with this about 21 years ago when I was the president of the American Evaluation Association. It's basically the use of evaluation concepts and techniques and findings to foster improvement and self-determination. You can see there's nothing neutral about this. It's not, oh, I did the evaluation, the kids failed, the school failed so long. The kids are still there. They still need assistance. It's more how do you use evaluation to help people get to where they want to go. We provided more detail and expanded the definition as we went along to give people more of a feel for what this is about. And it's an approach that aims to increase the probability of achieving program success, because there are no guarantees in life, by providing program stakeholders with tools for assessing the planning, implementation, and self-evaluation of their program. This is critical, this part. It's also mainstreaming evaluation as part of the planning and management of the program or organization. So no longer is it parasitic and secondary and folks feel, oh my gosh, you're taking away funds from the actual program implementation. It is part of planning and management of the organization. You've internalized evaluation, so it becomes part and parcel of program activity. I didn't draw this tree, so hang in there. This is Marv Alkin's tree on top, evaluation theorist. And I'm over there on the left on that limb, ready to fall off anytime. See over there? They put me in the use category, which I think is fair. A lot of people argue that I belong in methods in the middle, because I've developed a lot of tools and written a lot about ethnography, treatment control design, things of that nature. But I think they're right. I think I belong over here because fundamentally what I care about is use more than anything else. Anyway, this is just to be intellectually honest about where other folks have placed me, and that's over on that side on use. I'm going to briefly go through the contrast of traditional versus empowerment, just to give a feel for the difference. In traditional forms of evaluation, we are the external evaluator, separate from the group. Empowerment, we become internal, and that we become either a member of that group if we already are, or we actually just work with them to support their efforts. In traditional, we act as the expert who knows everything. We've been trained, et cetera, to be the top person and knowledgeable, et cetera. In empowerment evaluation, we have a lot of expertise, but we act as the coach or critical friend, respecting their wishes and their desires about where they want to go within the context, of course, of what's being funded and what the donors are talking about. But within that context, we are the critical friend that tells them honestly where things are from their perspective or our perspective, and supports them in their efforts by using data to feed back whether something's working or not working. I should point out one of the questions that came up earlier is, is how honest and objective is that? And the point is, my feeling is when you really care about a program and want it to succeed, you're going to be more critical because you want it to succeed, rather than having sort of limited interest in its future. Anyway, back to this. In traditional forms of evaluation, it is perceived typically by members of the community as data warehouse. Why? We do surveys, and very often we have to do a second wave and a third wave. You know, we want to get a good response rate, et cetera. And we're doing all the things we're supposed to do. And we're also making sure, you know, after getting all that, we have to then sort it, analyze, et cetera. And eventually we get it out there, maybe even in infographics. But by the time we do all that, they've already made decisions about what they need to do in their communities. So they perceive it as data warehouse. In empowerment evaluation, the community is using it on a routine basis to inform their decision making. In traditional forms of evaluation, you typically may foster dependency. I've done many evaluations where I've had, you know, tremendous expertise, and I've done award-winning work. I've gotten awards I'm very proud of, but I'm also not stupid. I know that it didn't have any lasting power more than a nanosecond for the policy perspective, because I fostered dependency. When I've used empowerment evaluation, it's theirs. So I've helped contribute to self-determination. I've helped build their capacity in evaluation, which is something that lasts. In traditional forms of evaluation, you have independent judgment, which is great. You always want to have that additional view, separate view of what's going on. The problem is, very often you get these extremely fantastic, bright evaluation organizations that go in there, and they are 100% correct in their independent judgment, but it applies to an organization that might be 20 years old or more, and you're looking at a group that just started in its first, second, or third year, embryonic stages, and they kill the program because they're not operating at the same level of organizational development as they should. In empowerment evaluation, you have a collaboration, and you can invite other parties to review your work and have the independent judgment, but on your terms in terms of where you are from your organizational level of development. In traditional forms of evaluation, they're rarely designed to go beyond, as you know, the demonstration project, the specific funding requirements associated with that particular project. In empowerment evaluation, it doesn't end. I've worked with organizations in the United States and outside the United States where funding has gone up, down, all different directions. But once you plant the seed, there's a certain level of interest in it to continue regardless, sometimes of even funding, and thus it enhances sustainability. Now, I've just given a very fast set of broad strokes about the differences, but I do want to highlight external and internal forms are not mutually exclusive. I'm just highlighting them to show the contrast between traditional versus empowerment, and that they can work together very well if they are rooted in the community's concerns and issues. Now, since we have 6 hours to spend on theory, I think I'm joking. Don't worry, I'm joking. I'm only going to spend a couple of minutes on theory. I know many of you wouldn't mind, but I just want to highlight a few theories in empowerment evaluation. The number one theory shaping empowerment evaluation is process use, which is simply the more that people engage in the act of conducting their own evaluations, the more likely it is that they will find the findings or the results credible and act on the recommendations. Why? Because it's theirs. Process use and then getting stakeholders involved is critical. When we do an evaluation, as bright as it might be, as precise as it might be, when we leave, they go, they didn't really know, understand us, and they basically let the report gather dust. And, the reality is that if you can have stakeholders involved and be part of it, there's a sense of ownership that they're willing to follow through on. And as you know already, the biggest problem in the field is knowledge utilization. Most of our stuff does just gather dust, as I just mentioned. Our biggest challenge is to find ways, and this has been very effective, in getting people to use what we do and do it as part of their intellectual development and their growth. This has enhanced knowledge utilization tremendously. 2 more theories, then I'll promise I'll stop from the theories and we'll move on, but this is very important. For those, many of you probably already know this, Mind the Gap, and have seen it. For those who have not, When I was working in England, I was going from my hotel to the tube, to the subway, and then to the hotel. And it said, "Mind the gap," really loud. I didn't know what they're talking about. I just got on from the platform onto the tube and then off to work. Then we argued about all the different issues that we were, worrying about for the program and the evaluation. I come home at the end of the day around 5 or so, or 6, whatever it was, and I hear it again, "Mind the gap." But this time, the gap is about 2 or 3 feet. I could have killed myself. And I went, "Oh, I know what this is. This is an empowerment evaluation." And here's why. On the one side, there's something called the theory of action. That's what the organization espouses, equity, fairness, all of these positive ma and pa kinds of things that we want out there. But then there's something also called the theory of use, and that's the observed behavior. In empowerment evaluation, you're trying to help the organization walk their talk, do what they say they are about, and making the observed behavior actually start to match or parallel their espoused theory, that sort of thing. That is minding the gap and closing the gap. So you have that combination. I'm just moving rapidly over now past the theories to just key concepts very quickly. When you think of empowerment evaluation, as we talk about it today in particular, I want you to think about just these concepts. Collecting evidence is core, identifying a critical friend, developing a culture of evidence, having cycles of reflection and action, basically, analysis where you're reflecting on it, but then you're doing something, the community's doing something about it, and then you're evaluating that. In the process, you're creating a community of learners where we're all learning together, including me, when we're doing this kind of effort. And hopefully you're developing reflective practitioners where we all are thinking about how we improve our work every day as we move forward. This is a very important part. I remember having an argument with Michael Scriven and some others in the early days about this. And they told me, "David, people have to operate on their own. Can't have a coach in life. You have to make it." And I thought, well, I guess you have some point there. But then I went home and I thought to myself, wait a minute. My exercise was going from the parking lot to my class to teach. I thought I have to go to the gym, make sure I stay in shape. Well, I was not crazy. I got a coach to help me so I wouldn't hurt my back or anything like that. My daughter, she's in volleyball. She's going to do that without a coach? I don't think so. I let her do this pole vaulting thing, with the horses and stuff, jumping. That was crazy, but I would never let her do it without a coach. Same thing in medicine. You think I'm going to have any of the students in the School of Medicine just go off and do operations? Of course they have a coach. So why not an evaluation too? I realized, no, this criticism I had been receiving was off completely. A financial advisor is a coach and critical friend. And we have them in life. Why not in evaluation? Critical friend believes in the type of program. Like I believe in programs for dropouts and for kids keeping youth away from tobacco, etc. But we're still critical about the questions to ensure an honest but constructive critique and self-assessment, including across various grantees. Linda Laney is there in the center. She's one of the empowerment evaluators I work with in Arkansas and have been working with for about at least 12 or 13 years on this project, keeping minority kids away from tobacco. And in empowerment evaluation, people learn how to monitor their own performance. I'll show you how they're doing it in Arkansas, where they're taking charge of their own evaluation with the assistance of an empowerment evaluator. Key principles shaping empowerment evaluation, I'm going through broad strokes again here, are things like helping to improve, a belief in community ownership. I'll go over why inclusion is so important in a second. Democratic participation, social justice issues that I know many of you are committed to. Community knowledge is respected, which is not often the case in too many evaluations. But we also believe in evidence-based strategies. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just because some scholarship has been used in a negative way. It doesn't mean you simply adopt things. You can maybe adapt them when you're working with different communities. If you're not helping to build capacity, then you're probably not doing empowerment evaluation. You should be helping people learn how to think as an evaluator, to do evaluation. This contributes to organizational learning. And the bottom line in empowerment evaluation is simple. It's accountability. Did you do it? It's not just a wonderful, warm kind of approach. It is, did you do it? We keep ourselves, our toes are to the fire, as it were. Let me highlight inclusion for a second. Inclusion, people think, oh, that's nice, David, but no, it's more than just nice. When I was the president of the American Evaluation Association, as I mentioned, I introduced this approach, and I thought I would do it in a novel way. So I had a special guest speaker, Nobel laureate, speak, and I said I could spend all morning introducing this person, but I think I'll just highlight and have them by just having them speak for themselves. Please welcome Dr. Albert Einstein. What? People, of course, thought, I was crazy. Didn't he die many years ago? I hired an actor who highlights different aspects of evaluation. I had taught him about it and empowerment, and they thought it was brilliant. Well, the only problem is he had, those remote mics that you have on your hip so you can walk around and use all your arms and flare. Well, he had one of those, but it was not working perfectly. He was going in and out like that, so you couldn't understand what he was saying. But I happened to notice there was a crack on the side. So I thought, I know what's going on here. The battery's not connecting. So keep in mind, I'm wearing a suit. We wore a cowboy hat because it was in Texas, just as a theme. And I get behind him and I grab a hold of it. And sure enough, it's working perfectly. The only problem is now he can speak clearly, but no one is watching him or listening because they're watching me dance behind him because he keeps on moving. It was a crazy situation. Like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to introduce this great new approach to very critical colleagues, and suddenly it's going to all fall apart because if I let go, they can't hear him. If I hold on, they see this dance, this crazy dance between the two of us. Now, I'm friends with folks from all over the world and different groups, social groups, you name it. And there's one person in particular in the association meeting that a lot of people didn't want to associate with because he talks computers 24/7. I happen to like him, and I don't mind talking about that sort of thing for an hour or so or two or whatever. Well, the one person in the entire room who would be a pariah in many respects, who decided to go find an old-fashioned microphone connected to a regular cord, came and saved the day. That's one of the reasons why inclusion is so important when you're doing evaluation. I'll move on because I know we don't have a lot of time today, but for more detail on the principles, you can look at the book, Empowerment Evaluation Principles in Practice. It's also in Japanese and other languages as well. Let me just briefly go over the 3 steps in the time that we have together, and then I'll stop and start to answer some questions because I have a few that are posed already. 3 steps, they're just 3. You help the group with their mission, to help them take stock of where they are, and help them plan for the future. Most evaluation stops at taking stock. This goes that next stage, and you'll see why. And I should say it can be a rocky road. This is back in Nepal again, as we're climbing up there, but it's a well worth traveling or trek when you do empowerment evaluation. You ask folks what their mission and purpose is, and they write down in little phrases what it is. And it's very democratic and transparent. And you get the group values this way. You honor any existing mission, but you go where the energy is in the room. And you give voice and make meaning. And what I mean by that is, you've often been in a meeting, you've made a comment, and it's just sort of ignored, put down, or worse, someone with greater stature comes in and says the exact same thing, and everyone goes, oh, what a great point that was. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Well, that's not being allowed to give meaning, make meaning, and give voice. And this does the opposite. This forces people to be heard. After doing the mission, you have 2 parts of taking stock. The first part is ask them to list all the key activities that they're associated with and that they are engaged in to make this mission possible. And it's very California-esque, but I give everyone 5 dots, and they can put the dots wherever they want. And this is just a way of quickly prioritizing. People say, David, it's not very quantitative. And I go, just count the dots. Whatever got the most dots, that's what you go for, and you start to rate as a group. So the part 1 of taking stock is just prioritization. Part 2 is rating. I ask everyone to put their initials up there, nothing confidential. And on a 1 to 10 scale, 10, you're doing perfectly in that area. 1, awful. And you are the facilitator to help engage that discussion. So quickly, for example, in communication, you might give it a 3. Why? That's my initials. And this is a real example, or it's abbreviated from a real example, an accreditation for a school I helped out up in San Francisco. They basically would have no agendas. They'd have overlapping meetings, you name it. The SEC happened to be a secretary. She thought the same thing, but she had it in written documentation, seeing scheduling where it overlapped. So I asked this person, the middle person, why are you giving it a 6? And you know who that is? That's the dean. And he explained from his perspective, we communicate very well compared to the entire institute. If we hadn't had that dialogue, we wouldn't have known he was talking about a whole different level of analysis of outside communication versus internal. So we got to define what we really mean and get a larger perspective. And we actually changed it into communication internal and external right then and there. The larger point is that we take all these ratings and we use them to understand what the problem is. And then when you go to plans for the future, you now know what to do. You now know when we get to plans for the future, not to just do this general big plan about communication. It is to have memorandum, it's to have not as many overlapping meetings, it's to have agendas, etc. You listen to the data, the evidence, and that tells you what's going to happen next for plans for the future. We also total and average it across, so in general we know where we are as a baseline, because we're going to come back 6 months from now or 3 and say, where are we now? But this is where we started as a group. By the way, we also do it down, and you can see I'm a 3.25, and it gives everyone sort of, not whether they're optimistic or pessimistic, but if they're highly critical, like maybe me, 3.25, and I start to say something positive with the group, suddenly they go, wow, he thought it was positive, and it's just norming. Anyway, we also do an average of the averages, and trust me, if I came over to Delhi right now and I gave everyone a 4.25 on a 10-point scale, you said, David, go back to California, what do you know? If you gave it to yourself, you go, David, how can you help us get to 5 to 6 to 7? You see how it turns everything upside down? Where instead of us having a target on our back, people welcome us and give us a hug, and they want our assistance. The last part of this is planning for the future. Once you have evaluated, the group has evaluated their own performance, you use their goals, not new ones. One of them was communication. What's your goal? Let's improve communication. Strategy, listen to the evidence. We need agendas. We didn't have them. Let's have agendas. Let's have fewer overlapping meetings. What's the evidence of that? An actual agenda. Fewer overlapping meetings. Very straightforward, very simple. My dad used to say, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. That's why you have to have a vision and help the community have a vision of where they want to go. And then that's what you can be assessing, their plans for the future, which is their intervention. Let me add this, and I should stop shortly because I know we want to get to questions, but I want to highlight this evaluation dashboard because I have found it invaluable in all the evaluation projects I've conducted, empowerment and not empowerment. And it's to have goals, or the group has their own goals, their own milestones, actual performance, and baseline. Watch this. This is beautiful. Having this to monitor their performance is phenomenal because once they agree that they want certain goals, and I'll tell you with an example in a minute, and it's milestones along the way, that the end of, that's all they have to do. All they have to do at the rest of the year is to put their actual performance in. And that compares with their milestones and their goals, and of course, baseline. Let me show you an actual example. We're trying to get tobacco-free environments in Arkansas. In other words, parks that are smoke-free. Well, the baseline may be 1 that they had before we started. The goal is to have only 4 during the year. So that's your goal, 4 all the way through. Milestones might be when you don't really know what you're doing yet, is to have 1, just divide it by 4. 1 the first quarter, 1 more the second, 1 more the third, 1 more the fourth. Once you agree on that in the beginning of the year, which is what we do for our teams that we have throughout the state, is we then just say, well, how did you do? And it might be 0 compared to what they expect to be milestones. So they're monitoring themselves. If it doesn't make it to where they want to be, then we get someone from the group who's been successful. And they tell us the story about what they did, which is often to get kids to clean up a park, put the cigarette butts in a clear bag, but then bring that bag to a commission or city council meeting to then ask for smoke-free parks and maybe have a journalist there to take pictures. Very compelling, more compelling than me doing that or some other adult doing it. is to have the kids doing it in front of media. My point about it, when you don't know what you're doing, you just divide by 4 is when you know what you're doing more, this would probably be a 0 because the council doesn't even meet the first quarter. And then you'd have maybe 2 for the second quarter, 3, 4, etc. Anyway, I'll go quickly through here because we want to get to questions, but hope this is helpful. You can diagram it this way, you know, where you show folks, this is what your milestones are, actual, that sort of thing. You can do it this way, which we're all familiar with, bar charts. Actual is 0, this first one. Milestone should have been 1, or it was 1. Then here you actually got 1, but your milestone is 2. And you can show visually, oh my gosh, we're making it. It's a nice quick way of folks monitoring themselves, for the evaluator, for us as coaches, empowerment evaluators, to see what's going on, and for the donor to see what's going on. And you can see here's an example where they've exceeded even their annual goals at 158 and their goal is 100. It's a very quick way of showing. I'm just showing you examples. There are many ways, highlighting them monitoring their own performance. When you do this, you can reach new heights, is what my point is. And that's my son over there as we're going, and our Gary is our guide as we go up to Mount Everest Base Camp. And that's true of empowerment evaluation also. You can reach new heights that you didn't expect to ever see in your work. To summarize, taking stock from our language as evaluators is the baseline. Plans for the future becomes the intervention. Interim measures are the milestones. The reflection and action are the mid-course corrections you're allowed to take when you do an empowerment evaluation before waiting to the end of the year is too late. This allows you to get feedback all the way through. And then you have a second taking stock, which is your second data point. And you have a third and a fourth. The key is for the group to accept this. So when you get to plans for the future, and one of them is communication, you say, wait, you spoke about communication the most. Why don't you take the lead? You don't have to do it all, but the lead for that. So the next time we have a meeting, a normal regular staff meeting, not an evaluation meeting, a regular meeting, you let us know where we are on that. You've just internalized evaluation as part of the planning and management of the operation. That's institutionalization. I know I'm going fast, but I hope that's helpful as a way of crystallizing how you can make it part of the mainstream of planning and management rather than secondary. These are just some examples I want you to read about when you get a chance. I can mention them briefly, but I know we want to stop and go for question and answer in just about a minute. So I'm going to breeze through some pictures just so you can select this a little more detail later. But we work with, in Arkansas, as I said, with academically distressed schools, Hewlett-Packard's $15 million village project, Stanford School of Medicine, getting through accreditation, and Arkansas Tobacco Prevention are just a few, but they highlight the same thing. Outcomes, did you do it? And I just want to highlight, we work in communities that you might not want to spend too much time in, and it's hard to recruit folks for. So you don't just fire everybody because they're not performing. You work with the folks you've got. And we had gains that are tremendous, which I won't go into detail now about, but you get the idea. In red, that's what their self-assessment was. We then did some intervention. We did all sorts of things that the community had in mind, including notifying parents. We tried this. I had the great idea of doing it on a kiosk electronically, but they didn't always have a computer or electricity. So we took the old piece of paper, put it in the knapsack, and guess what? It was very effective at getting parents updated, but it was their idea rather than just mine. Test scores we got from these kids operating at the 25th percentile. We had 59% when we started. We got them down to only 38%. Remember, we are not linguists, specialists, or anything of that nature. We're just evaluators, but we're methodical. If the kid had a problem in math, what's your problem? Rounding? Then what's 3.5? Let's do it again and again, and then we do it, and then let's test it. So we're very focused on our intervention, how we help as coaches. Very briefly, this is an example of the tribal digital village where we work with Native Americans. You can see we had the same thing, the comparison of first doing our self-assessment and then doing it again and seeing how it increased across the board. I mentioned earlier, that's the picture you saw earlier with me teaching at Stanford, but we're video conferencing with the Native Americans in the tribal digital village. And this picture was worth $15 million to the donors. Why? That was the outcome they wanted. And it happened to be captured this way by pictures is what they thought was powerful to show it had a lot of face validity. This is an example where they prefer to have statistical, which I wouldn't recommend, proof where it's statistically significant. It's very hard to reach and not usually that useful. But in the School of Medicine, to get this article about our work into academic medicine, we actually reached and showed that we could do this and have a statistically significant impact on the curriculum, which we did. You can read about that later, of course, if you want to. One of the last ones I do want to highlight is that we also learned a very important thing, which most of you I'm sure already know, and that's ROI, return on investment. When we showed how many kids we kept away from tobacco and stopped using cigarettes and spit and vaping and all that, they were not impressed. When we translated into how much money the state is saving in terms of excess medical costs, and we put all of the groups together, it was over $84 million. And trust me, you could hear a pin drop when we presented this finding, because it showed that it's very impressive. And we also developed an Arkansas Evaluation Center that's just surprised all of us. They put it to the House, the Senate passed, and the governor, and that was their idea, not mine, that they came up with in the process of doing this kind of work. My point in all of this is that you may reach your goals and even exceed your aspirations. I probably should stop at this point. This is my whole family as we made it to Mount Everest Base Camp. Whoever thought we could do that, that's for sure. And we did it. But we did it with a guide. We did it with a coach, of course. And we did it slowly and surely. So I hope this has been helpful. You can look at these other slides later if you have time, but these are some of the references that might be useful. A book on empowerment evaluation in the digital villages is a much more detailed picture of what we did, where some worked very well, some medium, some not so great. The book in the middle is probably the best collection of empowerment evaluation examples from everywhere from Peru to 4th and 5th graders in the United States to the examples I mentioned with tobacco prevention in Arkansas and the $15 million project with Hewlett Packard. We also work with Google and other folks, et cetera. And for those that want to learn about the principles in more detail, that book's very helpful. I recommend, if you want, you can listen to radio interviews we have on the web of interviews where they want to know more about empowerment evaluation. And as I said, this latest book is very useful to show the differences. And please feel free to look at our web pages on it. We look through tons of things every year to find what might be useful and inexpensive for you to use and to share with communities so they can be more empowered. I know it's a lot in a short period of time. I hope I didn't speak too quickly. I know I do sometimes, but for more detail also on what we do in ethnography, and I know we have another ethnographer that's here today. I read some of the bios. This is a book I wrote about ethnography as another tool to help you do your empowerment evaluation. I'll stop there and thank everyone for listening this much time. And thanks for inviting me. I'm very open to questions. And I have a few, by the way, that came my way already, but please feel free to share them with me now, and I'll answer the best I can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. That was really, really informative. And I think it has got all the people sort of thinking what questions to ask and got the questions. We have already a couple of them, which we got from various people. And I will pick up a few from starting with Onge's question around outcome harvesting. Is outcome harvesting one of the approaches to empowerment evaluation? David, why don't you start off with that? And then maybe the issue of bias versus objectivity in empowerment evaluations. Let's start off with these two, and then maybe we can go ahead.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, a couple things. And I'll go into sort of reverse order. As far as the bias, one of the big questions that is raised, bias versus objectivity, one of the things I mentioned earlier is that it's folks that care about and are in favor of, say, a program for dropouts working is what you want, because they're going to be more critical than another evaluator who really doesn't care about it one way or the other. So actually you want someone who's very invested in it. I should also mention that the insider, the community member, they often see a window of opportunity to fix what's broken. Something's wrong in their organization, their work situation, whatever it may be. And every day they have to face that it's broken and something's not working. Trust me, they want to run to this window of opportunity, this opportunity to fix it. So the bias issue is very, very important. You want them to be biased in the sense of being biased towards wanting something to work, not biased in that everything's wonderful. They're not, most folks are not going to say that because they're already concerned about living a life where things are not working, and this becomes their chance to do something about it. Let me just add one more quick thing about this, about subjectivity and objectivity. This is very, very important. That partially responds to this question. Not to mention, who knows really, truly what objectivity is, even though you try to approximate it. It's a very big question when you count cultural lenses. But let me add this. I worked in a VA hospital, a psychiatric ward many years ago. And these folks, these guys particularly, thought they could fly. I don't mean like we fly in a plane. I mean like fly themselves. Now, you may not believe that, and I may not believe that from an objective Durkheimian perspective. But when you're on the third floor of a building with no bars on the window, there are real physical consequences for that perception of reality. So my belief is that the perception of reality is just as important as the objective reality, because people operate on that. They behave based on that. So not to go into too much detail on it, but you can see why this question of bias versus objectivity is kind of a false one, in that it doesn't take into account people's perception, which is just as important. Subjectivity is important. And also has an idealistic idea at best of what objectivity is, which is usually through a cultural lens that biases a social class, gender groups, etc., and often disregards groups who are not in power. So that's a quick way. And then the harvesting part just becomes just part of this same question. You're less likely to be doing that sort of thing when you're trying to make something a functional reality that you rarely have an opportunity to do, except evaluation comes by, and it becomes a great tool for the community to correct and improve what they're doing instead of gaming it. This is a very rare opportunity for very many communities when they're given this kind of role, with stakeholder involvement role, and can help change their life. Anyway, hope that's responsive. It's my quick way of responding to that kind of question. Did you want me to also ask about how you decide amongst community members who will be involved?
No, I will come to that, David. And there is an interesting question again.
Yeah.
How do you balance the need? This is coming from Rana Dev. In empowerment evaluation, how do you balance the need of organizations to do evaluations quickly due to resource constraints versus taking the time and money to build capacity, be inclusive? So here also you can add this question about how do we decide whom to include from the community in the evaluation process?
Okay, thank you. It's the problem here. This is a very interesting question. Let me highlight, for example, the difference between some participatory work and empowerment work. I've done a lot of participatory evaluation where I've never been truly successful in giving off the evaluation to the group I'm working with. We work together, and I'm aiming towards it, and it's getting closer and closer, and then usually the funding ends or who knows what. So that's why one of the reasons I developed empowerment evaluation is I said, let's just start where I want to end with participatory. You're in charge from the beginning. And I will coach and facilitate that process to help you move forward. The reason I mention that as an example is that if you spend forever trying to help build capacity, you'll never get there. You'll do some capacity building, but the project will be over, the decisions will already be made, and there won't be that much progress. If you make basically building capacity part of them developing their program and implementing it, then you have this synergy where it works together, and it is living and breathing empowerment evaluation. So they're learning how to think as an evaluator, that sort of thing. So on the one hand, I understand the need to be rigorous and make sure people are trained to do what they're doing, but I try to do empowerment evaluation, as you can see in these 3 steps, as part of their work. In other words, instead of it being training them and eventually get to do the program implementation with that evaluation, you're doing it all at the same time. You are using an evaluation, empowerment evaluation in particular, to help them decide what they want to do, to plan, to assess where they are, and to implement. Too often we've artificially separated out program implementation, from evaluation, from policy decision making. It's all one cycle. We just have artificially separated it out. We come up with our best guess, and that's really all it is when we come up with the social program. And then we need to evaluate it. We evaluate it, we come up with new insights as to what needs to be done to revise that program. You implement that program, and guess what? You then have to be monitoring and evaluating those changes as well to improve and refine our understanding and insight. I hope that's responsive to the question. The key for me is that to do it all at the same time, rather than do it, I know logically, sounds logically, of train someone, or like we train all of our students and everyone else to move forward. That isn't the way to do it with the community. The thing is to do is to train them while you're actually doing the work. Make it experiential and all at the same time. Hope that's helpful.
Yep. Okay. So the next question, I'm going to sort of, there are two questions I'm trying to combine over here. So the question from Mercy Mananjani, and the question is, how do we take back and disseminate the results back to the community? After we have done the evaluation, how do we take it back to the community and disseminate the results? One part. Second part is, I will just add on to it, is another question which talks about broad strokes here required, is that what are the challenges in facilitating an empowerment evaluation?
Oh, okay. Well, two things. You don't have to worry about too much detail in giving it back, because they're giving it to themselves. In other words, you're helping them actually not just conduct the evaluation, but very often, depending on the level of capacity of the group and autonomy, is to help them draft up their own reports. Doesn't mean you can't do one in addition in case they need an externally validated one from an evaluator like us. But very often, you help them develop their own presentation. And it could be a slide presentation, you know, we're using PowerPoint. It could be an actual report. It could be some of their photo voice, where they're taking pictures of their community and the changes over time that they've helped map out. So the core in that one is really helping them learn how to present and speak for themselves. Now, I'm not a purist by a long shot, okay? My dad used to say, you know, if someone spilled the milk, you clean it up. You don't worry about who did it that much. It has to be taken care of. So if someone's not doing an empowerment evaluation where they're doing a lot of it themselves, I'll jump in, of course, if they don't have the capacity. And then there is the question of, how do you communicate that back? Well, if it's necessary for you to do that, which it may be, then you need to make sure that they get to review many drafts of it and help refine the wording, the goals, everything else before it gets external. You need to respect the cultural norms, of course. When I work with Native Americans, we develop it in the tribes, our efforts, our empowerment evaluations, our reports, but we have the elders review everything before anyone else can see it outside the reservation. Even if they weren't a direct part of it, we just respect that cultural norm because that is the role they play in that culture. So I hope that's a quick way to answer that. The other one, you said the broad strokes, is that the challenges that we encounter?
Yeah.
Well, the biggest challenge we encounter in empowerment evaluation is our own socialization. Let me explain that quickly. It's very hard for all of us. Me too, even though the founder of this, and we just had our anniversary, and it's a beautiful publication about what people thought about how great empowerment evaluation is from some of our highest critics, including Scriven, of course, and Patton. Folks wrote about how they admire a lot of what has been done. In spite of all that, the biggest challenge is for us to let go. It's very hard. I'm also a control person. I like to get things done and get things accomplished. It's very hard to let things go and let other people do it much more inefficiently and slower than I would do it, but it lasts. That's one part. The second part is very often you'll do an empowerment evaluation and people will love it and they'll love taking charge. And then suddenly, you know what? They are pressed to get a report out or do some budget thing or whatever it is they have to do in their own regular routine part of their work. And go, David, you're the expert. You take it from here or back. You're the evaluator. And you have to say, no, no, no. We will do it together. You understand and respect the fact that they still need help, but they're socialized to extreme to think that we need to be the experts to do everything. And third, we have to reorient our perception of the funder. We tend to think of, please just leave the money here and get out of here. And we lose the most important part of a donor. It's not the money, It's their knowledge about all the different investments they're making, and we don't even tap that. So to me, the biggest challenge in empowerment evaluation is the socialization that we all have that I think is wrong. I think we're all trained in that way in the wrong direction and need to reorient ourselves to value each other's role and contribution a lot more than we do now. Hope that's helpful as a sort of a very quick way of responding to what I think are the biggest challenges. They're basically our own, we create our own barriers, and we need to break through those and help people sort of liberate and open their own potential. And we only do that by pushing ourselves too, to go a step further and let go, by letting go often of the power, the needs that we have.
Okay. Thank you, David, on that. I think the time we are a bit short on time, but I think there are 2-3 interesting more questions, David, and before we sort of bring it to a close, I will ask those three interesting questions. There's a question about from Bijita, talks about, there are different voices within any community. And one, how do we manage those different voices, effectively manage those different voices in the evaluation? And I'm adding on to another part of those voices is the power dynamics within a community. There are different power dynamics which happens within a community. So how do we sort of manage or overcome these when you're doing sort of power empowerment evaluations?
Thank you. Very good questions. For the power dynamics, I try to require it be, as I mentioned earlier, inclusive. And what I mean that is also sizable numbers. 2 things that are very important here. Most folks will say to me, David, don't bother with the mission. We already have one. And please, this guy, he's a crank. He's always extreme. Please, we're not going to invite him. My feeling is no. Let's take the time, number 1, to do the mission, because who developed it? Well, maybe a grant writer, maybe one director, but it doesn't represent the energy in the room as far as the folks that are there now. And when they say exclude someone, usually I would love to have that person there, because they'll say these crazy things that are way out there, like the director's corrupt and whatever credibility they have. They open up the door so that people are now can talk about staffing and everything else that they thought was sacrosanct that you couldn't talk about, because now it's nothing compared to this other extreme person. And if you also leave out that person, you're going to further marginalize them. And they've become extreme because probably they've been pushed aside and ignored because of sexism, ageism, racism, you name it. And they've just become outrageously extreme because no one's listening over time. And if you bring them in, you're more likely to have someone that could be very helpful to you instead of undermining you. The power dynamics thing is very important. I always make sure it's a large group. You noticed, I know I went quickly, but in that example with accreditation for the school up in San Francisco, the dean gave it a 6. The secretary gave it a 3. I gave it a 3. Well, I made sure there's a large group with different levels so that she did elbow me and say, David, would you mind talking about this? You're closer to that level than her. She was also, because then it's a little safer, she thought, for herself. And on top of that, it's hard for, say, the dean or someone else to come down on someone lower level for their views if it's in a large group, because they'll know the dynamics of what just happened there. So it's very hard to have an empowerment evaluation with only 2 people, like a secretary and a president or dean. Then you have a power play. So I'm not foolish. I know about our Machiavellian politics and the rest, and I incorporate that by making sure it's different levels as well as different power groups all involved in the same process. But you make it large groups, making it much harder for anyone to come down on anyone. Also, by the way, I should say that by keeping it that diverse, someone will be outspoken and want to talk about it. And that doesn't mean everyone has to put themselves in line. One more thing I need to add to that. People say very often, please, David, make the director go out so we could all talk privately. I say that's nonsense. That turns into a whining session. You talk within the context of what you are going to be able to do in a work environment, because that's what you're going to go back into. I don't want to set people up for failure of having these outrageous, interesting, beautiful ideas, but they don't fit in at all with what the power dynamics are. So I want that to be done within the constraints of what you're being held accountable for anyway, and with the dynamics of the folks that you're working with. Does that mean it'll be more limited in some cases? Yes, but it's more realistic and is more sustainable as a consequence. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, David, that's really interesting. So the last question I will pick up over here is a sort of a three-part question. So I'm going to actually, there are three colleagues who have come, questions have come from, so I'm going to add those three parts and sort of string it together.
Okay.
One is, so a colleague has asked about, I think Malika has asked about how do we institutionalize this whole process of empowerment evaluation? Second part to the question is how do we sort of convince the donors the value of this empowerment evaluation and why should we can push for it? And third part, I think Nidhi has asked about, when the evaluation is commissioned and the evaluators are asked to follow set criteria and method, in that scenario, in a donor scenario, how do you sort of push for empowerment evaluation?
I mentioned the first one again. I got the second and third okay, but what was the first one again?
First one was about how do we institutionalize this whole process of empowerment evaluation?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, institutionalization is actually much easier than people think. Once you get it going, and I mentioned mission, taking stock, it's in the planning for the future is the secret to this thing as far as institutionalization. You have everyone in the community write down, or ask the facilitator to write down key phrases about the mission is, later turn it into a paragraph or two, whatever. You don't disrupt the process because you have to remember, you're facilitating a group, you don't want them to just get, distracted with or tied down with finessing it. So you do that afterwards, offline, but you move into taking stock together and you prioritize and you're then actually at the point of assessing or rating how well you're doing and then having a dialogue about it. When you get into, okay, then we're into plans for the future. And one of the things was communication I mentioned earlier. And you talk about now we have to have agendas, not as many overlapping meetings and et cetera, et cetera. That's when you go, okay, you spoke about communication the most. Would you mind taking the lead on it? It doesn't mean you have to do everything. Would you take the lead on it? And you can group together with other folks who are concerned about that and then come back to us at our next meeting, staff meeting, not an evaluation meeting, our regular staff meeting, and tell us just where you are on that for strategies to move forward for the group to hear and to have input on. You've just internalized and institutionalized evaluation as part of their normal staff meetings and what they're going to be held accountable for themselves in their own performance appraisals. You see what I mean? That one simple example is a way of institutionalizing empowerment evaluation in the process of doing it, because you're turning it into a regular meeting, et cetera, rather than another separate evaluation one. As far as convincing funders, my experience is hard-headed examples are the most powerful. Most foundations that I work with and most funders are very interested in evaluation capacity building now, because they know the groups need to have their own skills in that area to manage and to implement correctly, as we already know that as evaluators, but they're coming on board to understand more and more that they need evaluation. And you know what, if you look in job descriptions around the world, you see for managers, one of the things that they add is evaluation now, which they didn't have before. So I think there's an increasing awareness of how valuable it is. A lot of funders like empowerment evaluation now around the world, simply because they can see that it actually captures the attention, not of just community members, but also gets them to participate more, to change direction and to shape it and make sure that it's not something that's going to backfire for them, even from a public relations point of view, where they do the evaluation and no one's happy with it and the community writes about why it's so terrible. They realize, put it in their own hands. So it's turned things around for a lot of good and not so good reasons, but it's nevertheless going in that direction. The last part is very, very important question as far as, when they have their own criteria and all the rest of it. An important thing about empowerment evaluation is not done in a vacuum. It's done within the context of what you're being held accountable for already in the funded project. So you don't just go off and do whatever. It's what can you do within that context. A very super quick example, in the Oakland public school system, I help teachers, the superintendent wants to reduce the dropout rate, et cetera. I help them, teach in a way that's going to help increase, student scores and participation. Well, the nurses came up to me. They said, David, you've been helping everyone else. Can you help us out? I said, well, sure. We're getting fired left and right. And I said, yeah, I understand. And they're extremely well educated. But the problem is for various reasons, and litigation in particular, they're only allowed to put a Band-Aid on the kid's arm. So they're being fired because they're not really, from the superintendent's perspective, contributing to his goals of reducing the dropout rate. Bottom line, very quickly, what did we have them focus on? Asthma. When they focused on asthma versus just generally educating about health and how to be better, and which none of us are allowed to listen to, they actually focused on a specific group that had high dropout and absentee rates because of asthma. And by helping them learn how to take care of that, they stayed in school longer. The school got more ADA, average daily attendance money, and thus suddenly, why fire the nurses? I can see where they're valuable. You're helping people become valuable and change their idea of who they are. That contributes to that larger goal that exists, that they're all under the same umbrella, not just anything they want to do. In the context of this last part of the question, you can have all sorts of things that they still are required to do, methods and criteria, but it's reframed. One more, if you have just a second or two, this is a good example, I think, of what I mean by this. I do a lot of evaluations of satellite pharmacies, little pharmacies within hospitals. And I know them very well after the years. In fact, I know them so well, I'll sometimes brush in and I'll say, would you mind just filling out this log of what you do so they can see how many prescriptions you put out in your area in peds versus oncology, which is very few, but they're complex cocktails. With the other ones in peds, there's a ton of them, but they're the same, very small, easy description. He said, David, I don't have time. I'm a working manager. I don't have time to do all that, to keep records of these evaluation stuff. I said, oh, Dave. So I said to them, sorry, I'm operating too quick. Let me slow down. What do you suggest we do to let them know what's going on? He said, David, you know, if I wrote down how many prescriptions I am giving every day and how many people I'm managing, I showed that that's a log, but it came from them. Similarly, if you listen to what the criteria are, you listen to what kind of things you're already being told you need to have, they don't sound relevant at first. But if you have a group go through their mission, taking stock, planning for the future, then the most boring thing that no one wants to do and everyone's required to do, attendance, becomes something they want to do because it shows whether their intervention, their plans for the future are effective. You see, you help them reframe it so it comes from them, and then they can see, well, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. They want this kind of method. I'll use that method but now it's within the context that's meaningful in terms of what they want to do. So you don't have to change what's being required by the donor and others, but you simply have to reframe it so it's within the context of something meaningful for the folks you're working with, and it changes the whole nature of the endeavor.
Great. David, that was really very comprehensive. I must say we have received around more than 40 questions. So I could pick up a few, string a few together and sort of ask to David. We will try to look into these questions and sort of try to put together something so that those questions are not unanswered, because there's a lot of questions people want to learn about empowerment evaluation. And definitely, David, I think you will also get these questions from us, sort of help them answer,
Sure.
to so many people from across the world. It has come.
Wonderful.
So I think today I will stop over here because we are overshot the time. But I will call upon colleague from Indonesia, and in the board of directors for Indonesia Development Evaluation Society. Not only that, she has been a huge activist of gender issues in Indonesia, and she has been working across the development sector for a number of years. Damia, can I request you to take over and propose the vote of thanks for today evening? Damia? Hi, Damia.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Damia.
Thank you, moderator. So for us, thank you for the meaningful and useful discussion, because this empowerment for me as and also of course for Index, this is the for me, is empowerment is not a new concept, but empowerment evaluation is still new. Though to some extent, I think we at least we already pick here and there, but this is very meaningful discussion, and we really thank for Dr. David to give us this discussion, and also we really thank for the Indian Evaluation Community of India and Sri Lankan Evaluation Association for this cooperation. And this empowerment evaluation is really connected with the social movement, I think, especially the feminist movement.
Mhm.
I think we know from her story that this empowerment as a word which is put into action, which is we want to transform the society. So this is really a social force to change, to transform the organization itself, and also, of course, the society. So we really, I'm really impressed with this discussion, because I think mostly we started as the traditional evaluator, though it is really related with our background, whether we come from the movement or it is very nice to know that you, Dr. David, from anthropology, because my background also anthropology.
Yes.
So this is really meaningful, because this type of evaluation is really embedded in the organization. It's
Yes.
not from outsider like the traditional evaluation, but it is embedded in the organization. So it is we can change from ourselves, and also the evaluator is not someone is like higher than the organization that being evaluated, but it's like a friend. It is a critical friend. Reflection time, friend for the reflection, for insightful. I think it is very, very, very meaningful. Thank you for the cooperation between these three communities from Asia, and I think we want to go further, that this type of evaluation will be practiced in three regions. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks for the comments.
Thank you.
Fellow anthropologists too.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for a lovely evening over here in Delhi. And I think it's night in Jakarta, and it's early morning for David. Thank you, everybody. It was a lovely evening, and we will share with you the links to see links for the this whole session. You will get the link, and you will be able to hear it at your own pace. And on the questions, we're trying to work out with David to see how we can sort of answer the so many questions we have received. We'll not let it go to waste, and we will sort of try to answer them. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for a lovely evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Bye.